A freezing night, a quiet town, and a desperate cry for help echoing through the dark. Most people would have closed their windows and turned away, but not 72-year-old Walter Briggs. When he saw a helpless bulldog Francaise abandoned on the edge of a frozen river, he didn't hesitate. He ran. He dove. He risked everything. But what happened after that moment of bravery? No one could have predicted. Get ready for a story of unbelievable courage, heartbreaking twists, and the kind of bond that reminds us why we fight for those we love, especially when they can't speak for themselves. This isn't just about a rescue. It's about sacrifice, love, and how even the smallest creature can leave the biggest mark on our hearts. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Now, let's go back to that snowy night and meet the bulldog who would change everything. The wind howled down the narrow alleyways of the small Pennsylvania town of Fairbrook, dragging loose snow across sidewalks like whispers of forgotten stories. Walter Briggs, 72 years old and stiff from age but still stubbornly independent, zipped up his worn corduroy jacket and took his nightly walk just after dusk. His late wife, Marilyn, used to call these evening strolls his quiet rebellions, a way to prove to himself that life still had rhythm, still had meaning. Walter wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary that night. Just a walk, a few deep breaths of winter air, and maybe a quick chat with the local coffee shop owner on his way back. But as he reached the edge of Riverside Park, he heard something strange, something desperate. A cry. Not human, not loud, but unmistakably full of fear. He paused, his breath catching in the cold. The sound came again, higher-pitched, trembling. A dog. Walter's heart kicked harder, and he stepped off the path, pushing through the crunch of snow toward the riverbank. The moonlight caught a glint of something moving between the brush and ice. Then he saw it. A French bulldog. Small, shivering. Its front paw stuck under a branch lodged in the icy shoreline, its body halfway on the fragile edge of the river. Walter didn't think. He dropped to his knees and crawled forward. "Easy, buddy, I got you," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the cold and nerves. The dog's eyes met his, wide, terrified, but somehow trusting, as if even in the darkest moment, it sensed kindness in this stranger. Then the ice cracked. In an instant, the world tilted. Walter felt the ground beneath him give way. He gripped the branch with one hand and lunged forward with the other, wrapping his fingers around the dog's collar just as the frozen crust broke beneath them both. Water rushed in. Walter's body screamed in pain from the shock of the cold, but he held tight, dragging the small dog up against his chest and pushing upward with every ounce of strength he had left. It took what felt like forever. But finally, with a trembling heave, he rolled back onto solid ground, the bulldog still in his arms. The little dog coughed, whimpered, and then licked Walter's cheek. Walter lay on the frozen ground, soaked and gasping. The dog curled into his chest, shivering but alive. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an invisible thread of connection stitched by fear, survival, and shared vulnerability. But as sirens echoed in the distance, summoned by a passerby who saw the fall, Walter's eyelids began to flutter. The cold had taken its toll. The adrenaline was fading. The last thing he saw before slipping into unconsciousness was the bulldog's face, those soulful eyes, still locked on his, refusing to look away. What Walter didn't know was that this was only the beginning, and the bond forged in ice would soon be tested by fire. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor filled the sterile quiet of room 204 in Fairbrook General Hospital. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Walter Briggs slowly opened his eyes, blinking away the fog of sedation. His limbs felt like cement, heavy and unresponsive, and his chest burned with every breath. For a moment, he couldn't remember what had happened. Then the image of the Bulldog flashed through his mind. Its trembling body, the cracking ice, the desperate scramble to save it. His throat tightened. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his ribs quickly reminded him that heroism had its price. "Easy, Mr. Briggs," a nurse said gently as she entered the room. "You took quite the spill. Mild hypothermia and a couple cracked ribs. But you're lucky. If that young jogger hadn't called 911, you might not have made it." Walter's voice came out raspy. "The dog." The nurse smiled, surprised. "Still asking about him, huh? He's okay. They brought him in too. Animal control was going to take him, but someone from the local rescue stepped in." Walter nodded slowly, relief washing over him. But as he lay back against the pillow, something gnawed at him. That dog hadn't just been out for a winter stroll. The way it looked, too thin, patches of fur missing, fresh scratches across its side, told a story of abandonment, of pain. A few hours later, as snow continued to fall gently outside the hospital window, Walter had an unexpected visitor. A woman in her late 30s walked in holding a clipboard and a phone in one hand, a scarf still dusted with snow wrapped around her neck. "Mr. Briggs? I'm Dana Mitchell with the Second Chance Rescue League. I've got your Bulldog." Walter looked up, eyes narrowing. "My Bulldog." Dana smiled, then shrugged. "Well, technically he's not yours. Yet. But from what I hear, he seems to think you are." She showed him a photo on her phone. The little Bulldog Francaise curled in a blanket at the rescue center, staring toward the door like he was waiting for someone to come back. Walter's heart tugged. "Do you know where he came from?" he asked. Dana hesitated, her tone shifting. "We scanned his microchip. His name is Hugo. He was a breeding dog at a puppy mill in Ohio that was shut down last month. Looks like someone tried to dump him rather than turn him over to authorities. Honestly, most dogs in his condition don't make it." Walter sat with that information in silence. A wave of anger passed through him, not the fiery kind, but the quiet, sorrowful rage of someone who knew what it meant to be discarded. He reached for the water glass on his tray, then looked Dana square in the eyes. "I want him." Dana nodded. "It won't be easy. He's been through a lot. Skittish, doesn't eat around people. Loud noises make him shut down." Walter gave a tired smile. "Yeah, well, same." They both chuckled softly. But just as Dana was about to leave, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then frowned. "That's odd. The shelter just called. Hugo's gone missing. He pushed open the gate during feeding. We think he might be trying to come back to you." Walter's eyes widened. "He's out there alone?" "In this weather, yes. And he's not in any shape to survive long." Walter threw back the covers. His body screamed in protest, but his eyes were full of fire. "I need to find him." What started as a rescue was turning into something far deeper, and time was running out. The hospital staff did everything they could to stop him, but Walter Briggs was a man on a mission. He had ripped out his IV and signed himself out AMA against medical advice, ignoring the nurses' frantic warnings. The moment he learned Hugo was missing, Lying still in a hospital bed simply wasn't an option. Bundled in borrowed clothes and gripping a thermos of hot coffee from the front desk, Walter stepped out into the cold. The wind hit his face like a wall, stinging his skin and cutting through his clothes. Snow was falling faster now, blanketing the streets in silence. But he knew the town, every path, every shortcut, every shelter a frightened animal might look for. He started at the park, the very place they had first met, where ice had nearly claimed both of their lives. The edge of the river was now roped off with yellow caution tape. As Walter scanned the area, his eyes caught something faint. Tiny paw prints in the snow, leading away from the bank and into the wooded path that twisted behind the park. "Hugo," he whispered into the wind, following the trail. Each step was a challenge. His ribs throbbed with every breath. His legs, still weak, threatened to buckle beneath him. But he pressed on, pausing at intervals to call out softly. A rustling sound in the trees ahead stopped him cold. Walter squinted through the flurries. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a shape emerged from the underbrush. A small, trembling bulldog français, his face dusted with snow, ears low and body tense. "Hugo," Walter breathed, falling to his knees. "It's me. You found me." The dog hesitated. He took one cautious step forward, then another. Then, suddenly, he bolted. Walter's heart sank. Hugo darted past him, disappearing down the wooded trail. Walter pushed himself back to his feet and stumbled after him, shouting his name into the wind. "Hugo, please!" The terrain grew steeper, slick with ice and hidden roots. Walter's vision blurred. His breathing became shallow. But up ahead, through the snow and trees, he caught sight of the little dog again, stopped in a clearing, staring at something. Walter approached slowly. Hugo wasn't running anymore. He was standing beside a small, makeshift shelter. Just a few boards and a tarp propped against an old tool shed at the edge of town. Next to it sat an overturned food bowl. And something else. Walter knelt beside the shelter, his fingers tracing the edge of a torn collar hanging from a nail. His eyes widened. Scrawled in faded Sharpie on a tag was the name Hugo. Beneath it, property of G. Wilkins. Dana's voice echoed in his mind. He was dumped after the mill was shut down. And now here Hugo stood, not just trying to survive, but trying to find something or someone. "He's not just lost," Walter whispered, staring into Hugo's eyes. "He's searching for home." But that wasn't the most troubling part. Walter turned toward the tool shed and froze. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, he could see movement, a shadow. Someone or something was still living here. Was Hugo trying to return to his past, or was someone else trying to reclaim him? Walter stood frozen in the snow, heart pounding beneath layers of damp fabric. His breath puffed visibly in the air as he stared at the half-open shed. Hugo didn't bark or growl. He simply stood beside him, unmoving, eyes fixed on the doorway like he was waiting for something or someone. Walter took a cautious step forward. The floorboards creaked as he pushed the door open. Inside, the dim light revealed a small cot, stacks of canned food, and an old lantern flickering weakly. The scent of damp wood and rust filled the air. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. A man, grizzled, hunched, face hidden beneath a thick knit cap, stepped into view. "Don't come any closer," the man growled, holding up a rusted crowbar. Walter instinctively raised his hands. "Easy. I'm not here to cause trouble." The man's eyes darted from Walter to Hugo, narrowing. "That dog doesn't belong to you." Walter's voice was calm but firm. "And he doesn't belong in the cold, or in a shed. He nearly died." The man's face twitched. Grief? Guilt? It was hard to tell. He lowered the crowbar slightly, but didn't let go. "They shut down the place I worked. 15 years. Dogs were all I had. When the state came in, they took everything. But I couldn't let him go, Hugo. He was the runt. Nobody else gave a damn." "You worked at the mill," Walter said quietly. The man nodded, slowly sinking onto the cot. "I didn't start it," he muttered. "Just fed the dogs, cleaned up. But when it was over, I took Hugo. Couldn't stand the thought of him in some cage getting passed around like a piece of furniture. I tried to keep him safe, but then food ran low. He got sick. I didn't know what to do." Walter looked down at Hugo, who had now crept forward and placed his chin gently on the man's knee. It wasn't hate in the dog's eyes. It was confusion. Loyalty twisted with hurt. "He came back here to find you," Walter said. "Even after everything." The man sniffed, brushing snow from his face. "I thought I was doing right, but I failed him." Walter lowered himself onto an old crate. His bones ached, but the storm outside was only growing worse. "You're not the first person to carry regret," he said. "But that dog, he still trusts you, and he came back. Not because of where he was, but because of who was here." The man looked away, silent. They sat there for a long moment, listening to the wind outside. Then Walter stood. "He needs a real home, medical care, warmth. He's got a second chance, and maybe so do you." "I don't have anything left," the man said, barely above a whisper. Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled card. Donna's contact info from the rescue center. "Call her. She helps people too, not just dogs." The man stared at the card like it was written in another language. Then, slowly, he took it. Walter turned to Hugo and extended his hand. "You ready to come with me, little guy?" Hugo looked up, and with a tiny huff, padded across the floor and nestled beside Walter's leg. They left the shed behind, stepping back into the snow. But as they walked toward town, Walter felt something shift, not just in the dog beside him, but in himself. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was walking alone. Walter could barely feel his fingers as he pushed open the door to the Second Chance Rescue League. The warmth hit him like a wave, and Hugo gave a soft grunt of relief, trotting inside ahead of him. Dana looked up from behind the front desk, her eyes going wide. "Walter?" she gasped. "You're supposed to be in a hospital bed." He smiled weakly, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Didn't like the view." Dana was already on her feet, ushering them both toward the back room. "We've got a vet on site this morning. Let's check Hugo out right away." Walter followed her through the hallway, Hugo staying close, his body still tense but trusting. In just a few days, their bond had deepened. They had faced the river, the storm, and the past together. But now, as the door to the exam room closed behind them, Walter could sense something in the air. A heaviness. Like they were about to walk into something much worse than the cold. The vet, Dr. Karen Lutz, was a middle-aged woman with steady hands and a kind smile. She greeted Walter, offered Hugo a gentle pat, then began her examination. "He's malnourished, slight frostbite on the ears, some minor injuries that should heal with care. But she paused, her brow furrowing as she felt along Hugo's abdomen. Has he ever had a full scan? Any x-rays? Dana stepped closer. Not yet. We were waiting until he stabilized. Dr. Lutz nodded. I'd like to run one now. There's something I need to check. The minutes ticked by like hours. Hugo sat on the exam table, head resting on Walter's lap, while they waited for the results. Finally, Dr. Lutz returned, holding a tablet with the x-ray. Walter looked at the screen and froze. What is that? He asked. The vet's voice was careful. A metal fragment, near his rib cage. It looks like a piece of a microchip, an older one likely damaged. But the strange part is, it doesn't match the records we pulled earlier. Dana blinked. You mean, it's not from the puppy mill chip? Dr. Lutz nodded slowly. No, it's older. And it's military grade. Walter's stomach dropped. Military? He echoed. Dr. Lutz leaned against the counter. There were rumors years ago about working dogs being used unofficially for emotional support on small military outposts. Off-the-books arrangements, especially bulldogs. They're compact, strong, and surprisingly intuitive. It wasn't common, but it happened. Dana stepped back, stunned. Are you saying Hugo might have been part of that? Walter stared at Hugo, his mind racing. The dog had returned to the shed like he was following instinct, like he was tracing a memory. Dr. Lutz added quietly, it would explain the trauma and the conflicting chip data. Someone may have tried to erase his past, to make him disappear. The room fell silent. For Walter, it all suddenly made sense. The way Hugo had acted in the cold, the way he froze at certain sounds, how he flinched around metal tools. This dog had seen more than anyone knew. Dana looked at Walter. If this gets out, it could open a serious investigation. The military won't want this attention. They might try to seize him, for evaluation or containment. Walter's fists clenched. No, he said firmly. They're not taking him. Then we need to move fast, Dana said. Change his name, update his records. We can legally re-register him under your care, but you'll need to prove ownership. Walter looked down at Hugo. Then that's exactly what I'll do. But just as the plan began to form, the front door of the rescue center slammed open. A tall man in a dark overcoat stepped inside, flashing a badge. U.S. Military Liaison Services, he said coldly. We're here about a dog named Hugo. The past had come looking, and now Walter had to decide how far he was willing to go to protect the bulldog, who had already risked everything. The air inside the rescue center turned cold, despite the furnace humming in the background. Walter stood between the examining room and the lobby like a shield, his body aching, but his voice steady. The man in the overcoat, Agent McCall, flashed his badge again, this time slower, like he wanted Walter to feel its weight. We have reason to believe this animal was once involved in a confidential operation overseas. It's in the interest of national security that we retrieve him for review. Dana stepped forward, her jaw tight. He's not a weapon. He's a dog, a traumatized one. McCall didn't flinch. No one's saying otherwise. But that dog was embedded in a black ops unit that doesn't appear on paper. He was removed from protocol when a handler went AWOL. We have reason to believe this is the same dog, and he may have been exposed to classified environments. Walter's voice was gravel. You think he's carrying secrets? McCall's eyes narrowed. We think he might be a liability. Walter stepped closer, squaring his shoulders. He's not a liability. He's a survivor. The agent looked down at Hugo, who now sat beside Walter, tense but quiet, his wide chest rising and falling. You don't know what he's been through, Walter added. But I do. McCall raised an eyebrow. And you think you're equipped to handle that responsibility? I'm a Vietnam vet, Walter snapped. I've seen things you wouldn't understand. I've buried brothers. I've lived with ghosts. You want to talk about liability? Try being 72 with no family left. Try walking through life invisible. That dog saved me as much as I saved him. A long silence stretched between them. The only sound was the ticking of a wall clock and Hugo's slow breathing. McCall pulled out a file and placed it on the desk. Here's the report. You have 48 hours to comply. If you don't, we'll come back, with force. As he turned to leave, Hugo growled. Not loud, not aggressive, just a low, instinctual sound of warning. McCall paused, glanced back, and then walked out. The door shut behind him with a sharp click. Walter's hands trembled, but not from fear, from rage, from the sheer absurdity that after all Hugo had endured, someone still wanted to strip away his peace. Dana placed a hand on his arm. You don't have to fight this alone. We have contacts, lawyers, foster programs in other states, underground shelters if it comes to that. Walter nodded, eyes never leaving Hugo. I'm not letting them take him. He's not going back into a system that breaks what it can't control. That night, Walter brought Hugo back to his home for the first time. It was small, modest, but warm. Hugo explored every room, finally curling up beside the fireplace on an old blanket Walter had folded just for him. Walter watched him for a long time. You and me, he said quietly. We're both ghosts to them. But they forgot one thing. Hugo lifted his head. We're still alive. Outside, snow fell softly across the front porch. But inside, something else was settling too. Resolve. They had 48 hours, and Walter had a plan. But the battle for Hugo's freedom was about to test everything he believed in. 47 hours and 12 minutes had passed since Agent McCall walked into the rescue center with a badge and a threat. In that time, Walter Briggs had become a man reborn, not in years, not in strength, but in purpose. At sunrise, he shaved for the first time in weeks. Dressed in his cleanest flannel and dug out his old military cap from a drawer sealed since the early 90s. He folded legal papers into his coat, signed affidavits from Dana, vet reports, witness letters from the rescue, and even a notarized petition from neighbors who had grown attached to the little Bulldog Française they now knew as Hugo. And Hugo? He walked beside Walter, calm, confident, and healing. His body still bore scars, but his spirit had started to rise. He now slept through the night, curled at Walter's feet. He ate like he knew he was staying, and in the quiet moments, he would place his head in Walter's lap and let out a deep sigh, as if saying, I'm home. But that peace was fragile. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Agent McCall arrived again, this time not alone. 2 government-marked SUVs parked outside Walter's modest house, their presence loud and cold against the backdrop of an otherwise peaceful street. A uniformed officer stepped out with a crate and clipboard in hand. Walter stood on the porch, Hugo by his side. Mr. Briggs, McCall called out, we gave you time. This doesn't need to be difficult. Walter raised his voice, not out of defiance, but with the slow, commanding tone of a man who had once given orders under fire. You had your 48 hours. So did I. He stepped down onto the porch, handing over the paperwork Dana had helped him prepare. You'll find notarized proof of ownership, a registered vet's evaluation clearing him of any mental or physical instability, and signed community affidavits attesting to his positive behavior. McCall scanned the folder, his lips tightening. Walter continued, "You want to talk about national security? I'll talk to Congress if I have to. About off-the-books ops using unregistered animals. About what you do to them when you're done. This dog isn't a tool. He's not some forgotten piece of intel. He's a living being." McCall exhaled slowly, closing the folder. "You think a judge will believe a story like that?" Walter's jaw tightened. "I don't need them to believe. I need them to listen. And trust me, they will." A silence stretched between the men. Hugo stood steady beside Walter, not flinching, not retreating, his small body upright, his eyes calm. Then something unexpected happened. One of the younger officers stepped forward, crouched down, and offered his hand to Hugo. The bulldog sniffed it and licked his fingers. The officer looked at McCall. "He's not a threat, sir." McCall stared long and hard at Walter, then turned toward the SUV. "Let's go." "No retrieval?" the officer asked. McCall paused. "Not today." And just like that, they drove off. Walter didn't move for several minutes. He stood in the snow, watching the vehicles disappear down the hill. Only when the silence returned did he look down at Hugo. "We did it, kid." That night, Walter lit a fire and settled into his old armchair. Hugo jumped up beside him, curling against his side without hesitation. Walter stared into the flames, his hand resting gently on Hugo's back. "You're not just a dog," he said softly. "You're proof that no matter how lost we get, no matter what they take from us, we can find our way back." Hugo gave a soft, content grunt. They didn't need medals or headlines. Just this moment. Just the warmth of a fire, the promise of safety, and the unspoken bond between two survivors who found each other when the world had nearly forgotten them. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who believes in second chances, and help us spread more stories of courage, loyalty, and hope.